Dear colleagues, it is my pleasure and honor to welcome you today at the roundtable organized by the Russian International Affairs Council and the Korean Foundation dealing with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on Russia-Korea relations. First, I would like to introduce our esteemed speakers. Today we have with us from Seoul and from Moscow, Ambassador Park Ro-Byug, former ambassador of the Republic of Korea to Russia and Secretary General of the International Conference of Asian Political Parties. From Moscow, Ambassador Gleb Ivashentsov, former ambassador of the Russian Federation to the Republic of Korea and Vice President of the Russian International Affairs Council. Professor Om Guho, Director of the Asia-Pacific Research Center at Hanyang University, and Professor Alexander Vorontsov, Head of Korea Division at the Institute of Oriental Studies of the Russian Academy of Sciences. And my name is Ksenia Kuzmina. I'm Program Manager for Asia-Pacific at the Russian International Affairs Council. I would like to start by noting that 2020 is the year that Russia and the Republic of Korea celebrate the 30-year anniversary of diplomatic relations. Over this period, we have achieved a significant progress in terms of mutual understanding, in terms of trade flows and economic cooperation, cultural and educational exchanges. But Moscow and Seoul still have a great untapped potential. It is vital that we take this opportunity not only to celebrate and to take stock of what we have achieved, but also to search for new prospects and new opportunities for growth. I would like to remind you of the slogan of the anniversary of 30 years diplomatic relations: to be friends, to trust, and to act. And our mutual trust and our joint action become all the more important in the current unstable environment. This year, the COVID-19 pandemic has created great challenges for all international environment, not only for people's health, but also for global economy and global security. International communications as well as trade chains have been disrupted. Global recession is starting. The public mood all over the world has shifted, and we witness negative trends in China-US relations, which are bound to affect all the international relations and global economy. Our two countries are now in different situations in terms of COVID-19. Republic of Korea has managed to efficiently and swiftly tackle the pandemic. We see it now as the evidence that our esteemed Korean participants are speaking from the studio, while we from Moscow are speaking from our homes. Russia is now quite at 5 figures of affected, but we hope that the situation has already taken the turn for the best and everything will be back to normal soon. The pandemic and the anti-epidemic measures will inevitably affect Russia-Korea relations, but we have yet to see in what ways and whether some new opportunities could be created because of these changes. In these circumstances, it's all the more important to conduct an open and frank exchange of views and expert dialogue. And I hope we will be able to have such a frank and thought-provoking exchange now. And before we start our discussion, I would like to note for those who follow us live, just to thank them for joining us and to say that they can ask questions in the YouTube chat and we will address them later at the Q&A session. And with that, it's my honor to give floor to Ambassador Park for his speech.
Good morning in Moscow time. I would like to first thank Korea Foundation and RIAC for taking initiatives of holding such a video dialogue between us under the challenging time of COVID-19 pandemics. I'm very pleased to have a chance to see all of my Russian colleagues in good health. This year, as the moderator said, marks the 30 years of the anniversary of diplomatic relations establishments between our two countries. Due to the unexpected outbreak of pandemic, all the program was halted. Yet, under the spirit of the close cooperation and friendly partnership between our countries, we are embracing a common approach of the moving toward better and the thriving and prosperous strategic partnerships as a good neighbors. I would like to first touch on the first subtopics on the Korea's action to fight COVID-19, and then move on to the second topic of international possible trends due to the pandemics. Of course, the Korea has returning to the somewhat limited normal situation. This was possible through the government decisive actions and responses. It is based on several factors. Of course, the solid public healthcare system and the devoted medical service teams, and also people's active full participation, accepting some limited use of the IT tools for tracing affected peoples and their private life. The number of the confirmed cases per day now steadily flattened and declined since the outbreak of the 900 in late February. That now the number of the confirmed cases reached around less than 200 cases. So we can manage, I mean the hospitals and the medical service can manage that kind of numbers. So we downgraded last week the lockdown the steps to allow the people to conduct some normal life, taking such masks and then maintaining social distance measures. From early days of the COVID-19 outbreak, the Korean government adopted, as I said, preemptive approach. Still, we have been maintaining openness and transparency in information sharing about COVID-19 measures. So Korea's the control strategy can be summarized as 3 T's. What does it mean, 3 T's? Is the testing, thoroughly, and tracing completely, and then treatment for the affected people. So as for the testing, robust diagnostic testing capability was the key. And our capability of testing facility is up to 20,000 per day. So now more than 450,000 COVID-19 tests have been conducted. The safety of the frontline medical workers were ensured by the introducing drive-through the testing or phone booth testing stations, which was very creative, and then other countries followed that cases. Now the testing is free, regardless of their nationalities. So we can make sure the people to voluntarily join the testing. And second aspect is the tracing. Tracing means using the various IT tools, but the relevant information is disclosed to the public without protecting the affected people. Following the preemptive screening and tracing, of course, full treatment has been provided at the early stage to increase the chances of the recovery. As a result, the COVID-19 case fatality is much lower than 2% per the tested cases. And lastly, the Korean government put measures in place to manage the potential risk of cross-border traffic. We do not take the measures of the out-blank total entry ban, but with limited adaptation and the fine-tuning of measures so that we can control and track the inbound travelers, the visit and outbound traveling. These measures include the special measures of the self-diagnosing mobile application and also self-quarantine for 2 weeks. And we can summarize the trust TRUST campaign. What does it mean, trust? Transparency and responsibility and united action and scientific approach and together, all together in solidarity. That principles was applied widely based on our lessons and experiences. And Korea is now returning to the normal situation. We held even the nationwide general elections last month, taking this mask all together. I would like to mention on the global, situation and cooperation in this stage, because as moderator, as we all know, the pandemic impact is so widespread that sometimes crossed the borders and disrupted all global supply chains, and even the spread, panic and xenophobia. So the Korean government is trying to alleviate such an impact by taking the macroeconomic monetary policies and the financial stabilization measures to overcome such economic negative impact. We supplied $106 billion for the medium and the small companies and also the other the businesses. Also, last week we had a measure of distribution of a one-time special payment to all Korean people as part of emergency relief fund. Let me turn to the second subject of international impact, or more broadly. It has been argued that the pandemic may herald a new era in our globalized world and the time and mark turning point in human history. So when we look back two views, there are opposite views. One is very negative and pessimistic. The other is optimistic. The pessimistic views is a little bit prevailing now. They contend that globalization based on the liberal international order and free trade will come to an end. So we have to take other, the era. The other view is quite optimistic, saying that this pandemic may end within a year, as long as we create some vaccine or the cure or the medicines. It will not last, and it will not change the fundamental process of economic globalization, let alone the cultural globalizations. I think there should be some adjustments inevitably, depending upon our effective responses. Our means not only domestic but also international. First, the phenomenon is that rather than market, it is the government and the state that will play a greater role in addressing this new period. And second one is the division of supply chains and also globalized distribution of the consumption may be replaced with either inward orientations or somewhat diversified patterns of production and consumptions. And third trend, of course, we are already witnessing that competition, strategic competition between U.S. and China for hegemony will intensify. So somebody said now G0 period is emerging. Let's see how we can handle this G0 period with collective wisdom. And finally, the pandemic is also testing resilience of the global governance, particularly in both health and economic areas. So in case of Korean government, we are ready to bolster, consolidate the international united efforts and coordinate the policy responses. For example, Korea has contributed financial support for the development of the vaccine the areas together with the European Union, and Korea is ready to provide full assistance to the nations with less developed healthcare systems. And also in economic areas, Korea is developing maintaining flow of essential exchange of the people and goods. And also, as a part of our contribution to effective global governance, Korean president supports the proposal by the G20 president to take the action plans. I would like to re-emphasize again the importance of our close cooperation and united response for the prepared needs for the future, because there is always a possibility of another wave of the pandemics, maybe this winter or next year. So before closing, I am very much interested in addressing some questions for our Russian colleague, how the Russian experts they predict these pandemics, the trend, and also to what extent Russia recognized the pandemic as some common threat, not just one country or individual country threat. And the third one might be how we can work together at the bilateral and multilateral levels, so that we can recommend each government expand the area of cooperations in the future. So I hope that this conference will serve as a very useful platform to reaffirm our firm cooperative stance and also share our insight for the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Park, for your very interesting speech. You've covered, I think, 2 blocks of very important issues. First of them is the Korea's policy that defined Korea's success in fighting COVID-19, because I think for now we can tell that South Korea represents one of very few success stories in the world in fighting the global pandemic. And it's probably useful for all of us to learn from South Korean experience. And the second big block of issues is the influence and the impact of the pandemic on the global order and what we could do to avoid great negative implications for Russia, for Korea, and for the whole world. And I think and I hope that during our discussion we will try to find some points of mutual understanding and maybe to define some joint actions and joint activities we could take, Russia and Korea, in order to mitigate the negative impact of the pandemic. And I'm glad to give floor to Ambassador Gleb Ivashentsov. Please, Gleb Alexandrovich.
Dear colleagues, I welcome all of you today at this meeting. We are celebrating the 30th anniversary of establishment of diplomatic relations between our 2 countries this year. And of course, we could talk a lot about the achievements we have and about the tasks which still lie ahead of us. But it happens so that the first Russian-Korean discussion between the Korea Foundation and Russian International Affairs Council is on COVID-19 subject. So some very unfortunate and sudden events entered the program of ours. I welcome Ambassador Park Ro-Byug and Professor Ro-Byug. We are old friends. We discussed all things of Russian-Korean relations and international relations for so many times together. And I think that our today's discussion will also bring some positive results which will help just us as discussants, but our countries and our governments as well. You see, this COVID-19 has changed everyday routine throughout the world. Moreover, not only the formats of the population's labor activity, the habitual course of life has been disrupted, which means that the existing order as a whole has been challenged. It is just not a medical case. It is a big political and civilizational challenge for the whole of mankind. And this will inevitably lead to major changes in the balance of power in the world and virtually to a change in the world order. But at the first stage, these changes will take place due to exacerbation of the processes that have already begun and are already gaining momentum. And in this case, I will first of all refer to the growing United States-China confrontation. Due to geography and politics, this is directly related to both Russia and the Republic of Korea. The United States, which at the beginning of the pandemic showed outright selfishness towards its allies and failed to quickly cope with the epidemic at home, is losing its appeal and influence in the world. The American unipolar world did not take place and will not take place. At the same time, China, which has the fastest to cope with the epidemic at home, strengthened its position. The current United States-China standoff is often compared to the Soviet-American standoff of the Cold War time. But there is profound difference between the two. The Soviet-American confrontation involved not just two superpowers, but two systems whose peaceful coexistence seemed to both Moscow and Washington like a lull before the last and decisive battle. However, as the existing system of globalization was the most important source of the Chinese economic miracle, China is disinterested in breaking the system and building a new one instead. Beijing simply intends to reformat this for itself, which makes it thus much easier compared to the one set by the former Soviet Union. So what are we all to do in this situation? The problems for resolving the contradictions between Washington and Beijing are not yet clear, either in terms of timing or content. If the trend towards confrontation in the United States-China relations increases further, other states in Asia and beyond will have to choose between expanding economic partnership with the PRC and developing military political interaction with the United States. The United States-China confrontation may, however, turn out not only toward bipolarity, but also to what could be called world non-polarity, where neither the United States nor China simply have the strength to become the dominant players, either individually or in tandem. What is to be Russia's line in these conditions? There is no question of Russian mediation in settling the United States-China showdown. In the current circumstances, neither Washington nor Beijing needs such mediation. At the same time, Russia's participation in the creation of a kind of qualitatively new, non-aligned movement with the inclusion of India, the ASEAN states, possibly Egypt, Brazil, South Africa, and other regional powers, including those of the old continental Europe, like Germany, France, and Italy, as well, would bring a significant return. The same goals would be met also by activating the mechanism of trilateral Russia-India-China consultations within the framework of the RIAC group, which could become the core of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Russia's strategic goal is to raise relations with India to the level of relations with China and thereby ensure a geopolitical balance on the Eurasian continent. It is also useful to inject a fresh stream into relations with Tokyo, shifting the focus of the dialogue with it from the problems of bilateral Russia-Japan relations to regional security issues. Japan's main interest is not so much in getting the islands back, but in building a stable relationship with Russia as an independent actor in Eurasia in relation to China. Such independence is a fundamental interest of Russia as well. Another area of work relates directly to Northeast Asia. The success of China, Japan, both Koreas, Vietnam, in countering the pandemic against the backdrop of a confused and distraught West of both Europe and the United States has dramatically raised the authority of the Asian model of society and the Asian method of decision making. Therefore, the world will now more attentively turn to Asia for answers to acute global questions. In this situation, we should insistently work on the formation of a multilateral security system in Northeast Asia itself. The existing security architecture in the region was formed during the Cold War, and it does not correspond neither to the current configuration of force fields in Asia-Pacific region, nor to the tasks of fighting global and regional threats. The new security system should include all states that are geographically related to the region, namely China, Japan, the DPRK, the Republic of Korea, Mongolia and Russia, as well as the United States, which doesn't belong to the region geographically, but has significant security interests here. The system should not be either United States or China-centric. Asia needs not a new leader, but a new joint, equal, fair, and effective response to existing regional and global security challenges, from the threat of nuclear conflict to a pandemic. And this COVID-19 pandemic could be the first ground which could bring together all members of the Northeast Asia community. To start with discussions on fighting the pandemic, we can go further on to fight on other security changes to finally build a comprehensive security system for our region. Good neighborly relations with the Republic of Korea, which is 30 years old this year, are important to Russia. First of all, in terms of improving the situation on the adjacent Korean peninsula. We do not need weapons rattling there by any side. This country is also valuable to Russia as a trade, economic, scientific, and technological partner. South Korea's interest in Russia also has a political and economic basis. As for the political side, the North Korean subtext is important, first of all. Second, Russia is important to South Korea as a kind of counterweight to China and Japan in Northeast Asia. In economic terms, South Korea is very attracted to the development of natural resources of Siberia and the Russian Far East. At the same time, Russia is a promising market for South Korean industrial products. South Koreans are also ready to cooperate with Russia in areas where Russian technologies continue to be at a high level, international level, in particular in space exploration and nuclear energy. I shall not go to quote all the figures of our trade and investment and so on. They all can be found in the relevant directories. We have achieved a lot in the during the 30 years of our cooperation, but still a lot of tasks are to be settled. There are no controversial issues in Russia-South Korea relations, and they are unlikely to arise. In the Republic of Korea, there are no political parties or organizations which speak from anti-Russian positions. On the issue of relations with Russia, the country has formed a kind of national consensus in favor of developing a strategic bilateral partnership. It is noteworthy in this regard that despite the persistent United States pressure, the Republic of Korea did not join the sanctions against Russia in connection with the events in Ukraine. At the same time, the Russian-South Korean strategic partnership is not to be limited by just cooperation in bilateral affairs and on matters of the Korean Peninsula. It should include interaction on global issues as well. It is no secret that when voting in the United Nations and other international fora, the Republic of Korea quite often does not stand in solidarity with Russia. For Russia, anyway, relations with the Republic of Korea have an independent value and are not determined by its or our relations with third countries. Moscow is aware of the Republic of Korea's allied relations with the United States, but views it primarily as a partner of Russia and not an ally of the United States. Dear friends, a crisis, as the Asians said, is not only a disaster, but also an opportunity. Any global crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic not only creates additional risks, challenges, and threats to the foreign policy of any country, but also creates new opportunities and opens up new prospects. Russia and the Republic of Korea are no exception in this sense. Both of our countries have shown the world a responsible attitude to overcoming the threat of COVID-19. Internal strength, organization, and national unity in the fight against this threat at home. And at the same time, they also helped other countries to solve their problems with the pandemic, which not all states were prepared to do. The pandemic is a proof of the interdependence of members of the world community. The experience of overcoming COVID-19 is intended to open the way to the development of new forms of international cooperation in solving all problems common for the states of the world. The partnership between Russia and the Republic of Korea should also play a role in this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Ivashentsov, for such an interesting and thought-provoking speech that covers the opportunities for cooperation and mutual threats that Russia and Korea now face against the background of global pandemic. And we move to Professor Ohm for his speech. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Kuzmina. And I would like to thank Korea Foundation and RIAC for inviting me to this meaningful online meeting. Before starting my presentation, I would like to say I fully agree with Mr. Ambassador Ivashentsov. Coronavirus is not just a threat, but also it's an opportunity for our bilateral cooperation. Today, I would like to talk about following three questions in my slide. First, why is Korea Russia cooperation. I'm sorry, cooperation important during coronavirus. This to say, what is implications for bilateral cooperation? Second, how will corona crisis affect Korea and Russia economically and politically? And third, what should we do in response to the corona crisis? The prolonged coronavirus crisis can lead to major changes in international politics. First of all, the new normal phenomena that appeared after around 2010 may be strengthened. Strategic competition between US and China, anti-globalization trend, and more oriented to domestic politics. Secondly, maybe possibly multilateral cooperation and regional cooperation led by middle powers, including Korea, to respond to transnational security crisis, even if it is not regular anyway. And another, maybe the global economic impact is more serious than political. It can accelerate global supply chain reorganization, maybe the collapse of global value chain, and deepening domestic demand-led growth, more domestic demand-oriented economy, subtly strengthening dollar's strategic position because of global economic uncertainty and leaping of untapped economy. If we look at these global economic political changes in terms of bilateral relation, possibly prolonged stagnation of Korean financial situation, coming November's United States presidential election, strengthening conflict between US and China. So United States cannot afford to pay much attention to the North Korean nuclear issues. So we need to develop or make a new engine of economic cooperation, and we need to agree with new orientation of North Korean nuclear issues. According to recent IMF's World Economic Outlook, this year's Korea's economic growth rate will be minus 1.2. Russia's economic growth will be minus 5.5. Based on this forecasting, I conducted regression analysis. Possibly Korea's export to Russia this year will drop 50%, and imports will decrease 20%. So will be reduced trade volume by 40%. But we should note that next year's Korea's economic growth will be 3.4. Russia's economic growth will be 34.5. Even though we should consider there is a base effect, anyway, it should be recognized there is no need to pessimistic about our economic cooperation between two countries. For my opinion, I think Russia will get over coronavirus crisis well. Russia's foreign exchange reserve is more than $400 billion, and state wealth fund is $150 billion. And Russia experienced sanctions. So due to sanctions, the bank reserve ratio has increased. So Russian companies has very low level of debt, and agricultural self-sufficiency has also improved. So I would like to say that Russia has adapted to economic isolation caused by sanction. So I think Russia can handle this economic crisis. But we should note that Russia's coronavirus lasts very long, then maybe we can think worst scenario for Russia. Maybe coronavirus centered in Moscow, so possibly troubles between Moscow and regions can be increased, and crisis can cause some questions about the Putin's authority, maybe some negative opinions about recently proposed constitutional changes. And of course, the global oil price is most important. Maybe Russia cannot agree with Saudi Arabia, then possibly global oil prices is falling near $20, then Russia's economy will be very serious. I would like to suggest our task to overcome coronavirus crisis short term. Firstly, we need to reschedule our bilateral economic cooperation. As Mr. Ambassador mentioned, this year is 30th anniversary of our establishment of diplomatic relations. We have many events, plans, but I think we need to reduce maybe our cultural events, but I think we need to think new events about untapped economy, maybe online startup summit or some digital economic cooperation conference. And of course, we need to expand our financial aid to exporting companies. And of course, Russian and Korean government need to set up guidelines for business continuity plan. Of course, like today, in Korea, in Russia, actually, I have to go to online lecture. We need to carry out some pilot projects because the demand for cooperation in online education is getting higher in long term. Finally, we need to make efforts keep drive for cooperation between Russia and Korea. Naturally, the trade volume and FDI will be decreased. So we need to develop new non-economic cooperation such as health, medical care, education, and environment. Mid and long-term task. Yes, we need to use this situation as an opportunity to enter untapped economy. The digital economic cooperation between two countries is very complementary. So we need to expand our digital economic cooperation, and we need to promote, we need to push the negotiation process of FTA. I think we need to include not only trade liberalization chapter, but also trade investment guarantee and enlargement chapter between two countries. So I would like to suggest some TIDA model, FTA plus model for two countries. We need to diversify export items to Russia. Our Korean export to Russia, almost 50% is automobile and automobile parts and supplies. So we need to diversify, of course, IT industries and some digital economy fields. So we need to transform our nature of economic cooperation from traditional exchange of resource and commodity exchange to more innovative and more creative economic cooperation. And Mr. Ambassador gave me a very insightful perspective about international politics. I think we need to monitor and very proactively respond to changes, international politics, political changes. I think recently the European countries want to improve relations with Russia, so maybe we can enlarge our economic cooperation more multilaterally, including European countries. The most serious problem is growing conflict between United States and China. So maybe possibly Korea, United States, Japan versus North Korea, China, Russia conflict structure can be intensified. So, and the very serious conflict between the United States and China will give us a very big pressure to balance position between two superpowers. So we have to discuss this problem with Russia. Maybe we can make some diplomatic space, use space to overcome such very sandwich situation. And I think because of coronavirus crisis, also we need to rearrange our Northern policy, and maybe also we have to find some access or position to China's One Belt, One Road Initiative too. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Om, for your very interesting take on economic situation in Russia and Korea and world globally, and your very, very specific suggestion of how we could boost our cooperation in the near term and in the long term. Before I give floor to Professor Vorontsov, I have to tell you that Ambassador Park has to leave us in 10 minutes. So maybe if you'd like to make some short comments, we will first give you the floor to you for your concluding remarks, and then we get back to our discussion and to Professor Vorontsov and Q&A session. Please, Ambassador Park, if you'd like to make some additional remarks before you leave.
Thank you for giving me a prior the chance to talk. I think I agree. I fully understand what Ambassador Ivashentsov mentioned in his opening remarks. The key question, I think, now is realistically when and how quickly we can have the vaccine so that we can quickly return to adjusted or some normal relations. Whatever we can say, we need some of the cure medicine or vaccine so that people can move more efficiently and widely, so that we can talk and cooperate as much as we can. But in case of Korea, we are working hard with the European and other foreign counterparts to develop that the vaccine, maybe within this late winter or next 18 months, so that we can make people safe and effectively address the health issues. I'm wondering how the Russian medical scientific community or government together working hard. When does the Russian side expect to have your own vaccine or some cure medicine so that your people can return to normal life? Because according to the Bill Gates, he said we need around 14 billion doses so that we can be safe in globally. Because one country can be safe, but if other countries are not safe yet, we can move, each other. So the vaccine issue is a very hard and key issue to make us return normal life globally together. So I hope that we can have some good news from Russia together with the Korean side, so that we can overcome this very abnormal, uncomfortable situation with such a, the finding ways of the practical matters. And also, as the Professor mentioned, we need some short-term and long-term cooperative project. We talk a lot at the government level. Even I was ambassador. I worked hard with the Vice Minister of Foreign Ministry and other colleagues in the Far Eastern Ministry. But actually, business and the people on the ground have to handle it, taking risk of that. So there are a lot of the potential projects, but how we can make one or two significant successful case of the good story is very important. So we may have to focus on, I think the Presidential Committee of the Northern Economic Relations is working hard, but I hope we'll get back to the normal life with a tangible result. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Park, for your participation and for your remarks. And in terms of vaccine, I can say that there are a lot of research being now done in Russia according to that. And there are even some news that some trials of the first vaccines has already started. And there are not only one vaccine, but several ones being worked on simultaneously. And we really hope that in some near term, of course, after all the necessary procedures of testing, they could be actually distributed and will help to end the pandemic. Thank you so much for your participation, and I'm glad to give the floor finally to Professor Vorontsov from Institute of Oriental Studies of the Russian Academy of Sciences Please, Dr. Vorontsov.
Do you hear me? Is it okay?
Yes, we hear you. Yeah.
Okay, good. No, first of all, I would like to thank very sincerely the Russian Council for International Relations and the Korea Foundation for this opportunity to see my very dear friends and colleagues. I'm happy to see you indeed. First, and secondly, I also thank that what at least the Russian Council for International Relations very consistently developing this subject of the COVID problem and how to struggle, how to succeed, how to overcome this problem. It's not the first time when we met together, and I thanks once again because it's very important. What, of course, problem is serious, problem is common, problem is strong. What and time is came and we learned, we elaborated a little bit the problem. And of course, South Korea case is very successful, and I'm happy, really happy. And I would like to congratulate my Korean friends as they succeeded. They did it. Of course, not finally, but they did it to overcome the problem. It was very sensational and for me also difficult period when it was exemption of the problem in Taegu city. I have my personal friends in Taegu. I communicated them in that time how they are, certainly they are okay. But as we know very well, Korea succeeded. What the experience, what it's important for Russia? There are many important things, important factors which Russia can learn. And for me, as a Korean specialist, one, of course, government did the job very good and effectively, efficiently. Of course, society responded to the government efficiently. And it was a key, of course, secret of the success story. But why it happened to be? For me, it's one, of course, not only one, but one of the most important element. It's traditional Korean value, which of course connected very closely. It's community feelings, it's a collective feeling and responding of the society. It's important for Russia because what just now Korea was one of the countries who met the problem in the first, and just now maybe a little bit relaxed. Russia is under the process and we continue to struggle the problem. And the situation when not only in Russia, in many countries, unfortunately in many countries also, more strongly in Russia also so-called COVID alarmists who neglect the problem, who try to tell that, overestimated some problem. It's also, it's not good. It's problem. It's real problem. What Korea succeeded to cover this problem more successfully. Society happened to be more organized. Society to be mobilized. It's a good lesson for Russia. It's a good lesson for many other countries also, European, first of all, countries, America.
And Korea did it. I would like to congratulate my Korean friends again. They did it. And they succeeded to, by the way, conduct parliamentary election in April 15 very successfully. It's a great achievement in this situation. It's fantastically great achievement. The election were done. People came. People did their job, their responsibility, and fantastic result. It's records, number of records. Yes, 66% people came in that day of April 15. 66%. It's never before. Maybe no, never before. At least 20 years. 20 years. People told okay to the government. 60% voted to the government. It's great success. And what we met, interesting, very interesting. Immediately, some powers, some forces, both in Korea, but first of all outside of Korea, in America, including America, try to relocate their mass media opinion to another story, absolutely false, absolutely from fantasy, about the Kim Jong-il. Yes, Kim Jong-il disease, his problem with health. And during 2 or 3 weeks, all mass media discussed absolutely false, fake story about Kim Jong-il so-called disease. Absolutely fantasy. We have in South Korea great result in practical, in its fact of life, election in COVID situation. Very strong people, nation participation in this election. Very strong result. But another story was discussed. Absolutely false story about, oh, Kim Jong-il is died or not died, but he's very weak, etc. Absolutely false story. Why? Somebody don't like this result in South Korea, what was in practical life. But it's not Russia. Russia likes this result. Russia supports the vote of Korean people. Russia support and congratulate our Korean friends. First, they succeeded to cope with the problem of COVID. They succeeded to conduct election. They succeeded mobilization of people who came to the vote sincerely. It's great success, and we very, very happy to see it. And we have some kind of expectation also. It's enhance, it's make more strong position of President Moon Jae-in. And we hope that maybe in this situation, our cooperation dealing with the Korean Peninsula, we know very well. It's not today, it's not yesterday, it's well known so-called 3 great infrastructure project. It's a railroad connection between South and North Korea and Trans-Siberia Railroad magistral and gas pipeline, etc., electricity grids connection will meet more beautiful, more lucrative situation for realization. We hope for that. And once again, by the way, North and South pandemic, COVID pandemic, it's a common problem, of course, very huge, very strong, very dangerous problem. It's affected everybody, every country. But Korean Peninsula, Korean nation, both North and South, reacted very well. They once again manifested ability to react to this challenge efficiently. Of course, very different. We know in South Korea and North Korea experience very different, system very different. But North Korea closed the country very strongly and mobilized their society. South Korea also mobilized in different way, of course. People were high discipline, demonstrated high discipline and consciences. And to me, it's the root origins is the same. It's Confucian value, Confucian understanding that only altogether we can cope with the problem, altogether. In different way. North, it's one way, South, absolutely different way, democratic, of course, not close in city, etc., etc. But people understood that we should be together to cope with the problem. It's a very important lesson for everybody, including Russia. We just now, we in mass media continue discussing some people, so-called COVID presidents, so-called COVID alarmists, people asking maybe problem overestimated. It's not overestimated. Korea gave our good example how to cope with the problem. And they did it, and people just now more relaxed, more freedom in the society. It's good. By the way, today I learned North Korean mass media, they also relaxed some regime of restriction for the people, including foreigners, because situation is not so bad. Therefore, I would like once again to tell thanks to Korean nation, my Korean friends. They did it and demonstrated to all of us how it's possible to do together. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Vorontsov, for your interesting take on the reasons for Korea's success on handling the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think now we can proceed with the Q&A session. And first, I would like our esteemed participants, if they have any questions to each other at the first stage. Or could we just proceed with the questions from the YouTube chat, because we have quite a lot of them now.
Can I ask Dr. Vorontsov?
Sure, please, Professor.
Actually, South Korean people do not know well about North Korea's coronavirus situation. You said North Korea has also very serious. Could you give us some information about North Korea?
Oh, thank you so much. You know very well, as me, that everything which concerns North Korea, we have lack of information, unfortunately. But what I know, of course, as you also, I'm trying to monitor the situation, monitoring and looking. They succeeded to do very strong preservation measures. They closed border, if my memory not fail, January 21st. In January 21st, they closed the border The whole many countries in the world, COVID, what does it mean? Coronavirus, Wuhan, China, they only considering, but they decided and did it. They closed and very strongly closed the borders. And of course, many people in the different countries suspicious about the official information from North Korea that there are no one case of disease. But as I know, of course, my knowledge, of course, also not perfect and restricted. But as I know, the people inside of the country, including our Russian diplomats inside of the North Korea, they support this information. No case of disease. They really, of course, very strongly. Of course, it was one of the results, of course, of these restricted measures was very uncomfortable situation for foreign diplomat, including maybe, but they close the country and no disease. People are healthy. It's great result. And once again, maybe I'm mistaken. If I'm mistaken, I will be very happily. But the fact is that the successful case of South Korea is underestimated. The successful case of North Korea is underestimated purposefully, because some countries who are not so successful in the struggle against COVID-19, they try to, or North Korea, it's not possible to believe them. They try to conceal some facts. South Korea, of course, it's good, but it's some local example, but it's great example. North and South Korea, South and North Korea, they demonstrated, Korean nation in a whole demonstrated once again the great result. We cope with the problem. Why? What for me, one of the very important and key reason is the origins of the soil together.
And thank you so much, Dr. Vorontsov. We now have, I think, some of 15 minutes for discussion. And in fact, I must say we have quite a lot of questions from the YouTube chat. I will start with those questions that are specifically addressed for some of the panelists. And first, a question for Ambassador Ivashentsov. And the question is, how can the impact of the pandemic in Russia create opportunities for effective cooperation between Korea and Russia? So what are specific opportunities that the pandemic could create for Russia-Korea cooperation?
I think that we shall have some bilateral agreements on developing new vaccine and new methods of fighting such diseases like COVID-19. And as for prevention of spreading of pandemic from Russia to Korea and from Korea to Russia, I think all measures have been taken. There is border control and all that.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Ivashentsov. And there is also one question dealing with situation in Russia. Mr. Jared Sandler is asking, what are prevention measures that are currently being carried out in Russia? And those concern also incoming and outgoing people at Russian borders. Maybe you could also elaborate on that, Mr. Ambassador.
Would you kindly repeat the question? I couldn't get
what are the preventive measures that are now taken in Russia against the spread of coronavirus, and specifically those measures that are taken at Russian borders?
No, you see, there are a number of restrictions. They differ in different areas of Russia. Say, if we take Moscow, where we had majority of cases, we still have self-isolation, and for people over 65, and there are certain rules to people are bound to wear masks and while coming to shops. There are also limits for driving cars if you do not have need to attend office. A lot of offices are still closed for self-isolation, and all these limitations will last up to 31st of May. But in other areas, the situation is less limited. Because in certain cities, Russia is a very big country, and there is big distances. And there are certain areas which did not have any contacts with foreign lands, because actually this COVID-19 has come to Russia from abroad, and it mostly affected the cities which have more contacts with foreign lands, like Moscow and St. Petersburg. But in other places which are situated deep in the country, in some, say, towns or cities, there may be just 5 or 2 patients. Therefore, they do not have all these limitations like in big cities.
Okay, thank you so much, Ambassador Ivashentsov. And I would just like to add that as for border measures, now a lot of, like most international flights are stopped from Russia and to Russia, and there are some limitations on the foreign citizens going to Russia. There are only very limited number of exceptions for those who can enter now due to anti-epidemic measures. And we also have a question addressed to Dr. Om. It's the question of our Russian colleague, Dr. Anna Kirieva. And Dr. Anna Kirieva says, you mentioned that new northern policy needs to be rearranged, and asks you to kindly elaborate on that, Professor Om.
Thank Professor Kirieva. Our administrations have tried to implement northern policy, but frankly, the result was not so successful because we repeated our cooperation agendas again, railroad, energy, and etc., infrastructure cooperation. But because of coronavirus crisis, the global value chain will be suffered, and actually untapped economy will be more important area. So we need to change our nature of cooperation. Our Northern policies agenda is Northern 9 bridges. Actually, 9 bridges is about mainly infrastructure cooperation. We need to make new field in our cooperation, typically digital economic cooperation, and online education, distance medical service, and etc. So how we can rearrange our Northern policy, more innovative, more digital, more untapped. So we have to make more practical, more innovative cooperation.
Thank you so much, Professor Om. And we also have one additional question from our Russian colleague, Dr. Roman Lobov. And he asks how COVID-19 can impact the agenda of Russia-Korea relations and how the pandemic can change the approaches of South Korea's political class towards Russia. So please, Professor, do you see some possible changes in attitudes towards Russia?
Thank you, Dr. Romanov. The most prominent trend is conflict between United States and China. We will get very big pressure from both countries. If, as far as we understand, now Russia and China, they make some more strategic position, make more some anti-United States position in Northeast Asia. So we have some negative opinion about this China, Russia, North Korea versus United States, Japan, South Korea's confrontation structure intensified. So, of course, South Korea wants get more strategic diplomatic space in the field of Northeast Asian policy, in particular North Korean policy. So I would like to say that anyway, South Korea's foreign policy will be more independent, more middle powers position in this area. So we can make some more strategic cooperation space regardless of this so-called Cold War situation. So military alliance with the United States, economic dependence to China. Two very serious factors give South Korea make some more wise, more strategic position to Northeast Asia. So, of course, we need to make more strategic diplomatic cooperation, both countries, South Korea and Russia.
So thank you so much, Professor Om. We have only 5 minutes left for our dialogue and quite a lot of questions. So I'll propose that I'll just read out now all the questions we have left, and I give very short remarks, like 1 minute remarks for each of our participants, and then we'll have to unfortunately wrap up. So what questions we have left are as follows. So first of all, one deals with health cooperation, meaning what about several projects to launch rather than one Russian-Korean project on COVID-19 issue? It's the first question. Then another question is what can be done by Russia and South Korea for the economic recovery, but I think this question has been quite widely addressed actually by Professor Om in his presentation and his answers to our questions on prospective issues for cooperation. And then there are several questions from Dr. Bacharnikova on the prospects of youth format on fostering global bilateral relations on the Russia-Korea bilateral relations against the background of COVID-19 challenge. Then there are several questions dealing with global issues and regional issues. One of them is addressed to Ambassador Ivashentsov, and should there be specifically a leader like US and China in the Northeast Asia following the COVID-19 crisis? And then another question dealing with regional cooperation, should be a coalition of countries or something else? I know there is quite a lot of different questions, and I understand it will be impossible to cover everything in 1 minute we have left, so I just give you the floor for last 1 minute remarks. We'll probably start with Ambassador Ivashentsov, then Professor Ohm, then Professor Vorontsov. So please summing up remarks from your side, taking into account at least some of these questions.
So I'm very glad that our talk has caused such an interest, and I think we shall all think deeper on international consequences of the pandemic. And I think I'll just repeat that idea, that it is not only a challenge, it is also a base for cooperation. This crisis is a base for cooperation. And let us understand that pandemic is proof of interdependency of mankind. And it should lead all of us to develop new ways of cooperation in different spheres. We'll start with fighting pandemic, but we'll go on dealing with other issues of international interaction.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Ivashentsov. Please, Professor Ohm.
Thank you. Anyway, as Mr. Ambassador Ivashentsov said, we have to make this crisis situation as opportunity. So unavoidably, this year's our bilateral economic cooperation will be shrunk. So we have to find new engine or trigger of economic cooperation. In particular, we can find some projects in the field of education, medical care service, and environmental or renewable energy field. So we need to sustain our drive, cooperation drive, particularly our Northeast Asian situation, in particular North Korean nuclear issues will be stagnant for a long time, at least until next year. So we need to cooperate in trying to South Korea, North Korea, Russia trilateral economic cooperation, including railroad or electricity. So we need to discuss very actively. And finally, I would like to say, anyway, we have to reschedule our 30th diplomatic anniversary. So anyway, we have to make you very practical and very useful our events for our anniversary. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Ohm. And finally, 1 minute remark for Dr. Vorontsov.
My very short conclusion is Korean story, Korean case demonstrated again, and I think it's a very, very important experience. They tried not to find who is guilty. They tried to find what to do, how to cope with the problem. And they succeeded to do it. They concentrated efforts how to cope with the problem. And they did it. My thanks.
Thank you so much, Professor Vorontsov. And with that, I know we have to wrap up, and I have a feeling that we could have continued for another 15 minutes or half an hour. We have a lot of questions, and I do hope that we will have other opportunities to discuss Russia-Korea cooperation and impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on our relations in different formats, both online and sometime later, I hope in person. And I would like to thank all our esteemed speakers, Ambassador Ivashentsov, Dr. Rom, Dr. Vorontsov, Ambassador Pak, who had to leave us earlier, for their great and thought-provoking inputs, intellectual inputs in our discussion. I would like also to have to thank our very interested and eager audience who followed us on YouTube and asked so many interesting questions. And my thanks to our colleagues from the Korea Foundation and from my colleagues from Russian International Affairs Council who have made this exchange possible. And I hope we will continue our cooperation in future. Thank you once again for joining our discussion.
Thank you very much.